Hi, all, and welcome to Film Optimists, where we talk about all things film with a healthy dose of optimism. I'm your co host, Seth Boyd,
I am Megan Tierney.
and today we are going back in time quite a bit from some of our recent movies, back to the 60s, back to foreign cinema, and tackling one of the most important directors, one of the most important movements, and arguing the most important films out there. Agnes Varda's Cleo from 5 to 7 from the French New Wave movement. Now, Megan, I was very, very excited to have the opportunity to show you this movie via the podcast. So before I say anything, I'd love to hear your initial thoughts.
And you use the right word, Seth. You have showed me this movie. You have showed me this director also. This is my first from Agnes Varda
Varda.
is her last
Yeah.
name? Varda. So love a female director, love New Age. Not as much as you, but certainly you'll be able to talk a little bit more to us about it. And it does remind me of school age film classics that we're supposed to watch. Like if you're a film student, you're probably going to get this kind of film to analyze for good reason too. It's very classic, like New Age, to me
French New
at
Wave, you
least.
mean, right?
French New Wave, yes,
Sorry, yes,
exactly. And now that I'm recalling, I think that French New Wave is really touted for cinematic praise and also just kind of like the originators of a lot of cinematic traits that
Yeah,
we have in modern day, and they were real pioneers of it, in other words. So it's
absolutely. We should
fun.
touch on that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So I think it has been said that, and this is, a debatable claim, but it's been said by film critics that French New Wave was the first time where film was being consciously made as art. And so you had two primary movements that came out of. You had the Cadres du Cinema, which I'm butchering, but this was a film criticism magazine. And it's actually an essay in this magazine that Francois Truffaut wrote, The Auteur Theory. And that's the theory that the movie belongs to the director, something we've talked about in general, I think is very true. And so you have this movement that is writers working for the same magazine. And the two lead guys out of that are Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard. Godard's actually in this movie. And then the other movement is called the Left Bank movement. And these are artists who were all prolific in something else previously who decided to make a movie. In Agnes Varda's case, she was a photographer, and a very good one who kind of took that and expanded on it to go into film. Which is pretty similar to what Stanley Kubrick did, actually. He was a professional photographer before becoming a filmmaker.
You can see it in the cinematography
yeah,
too.
Exactly. Yeah, the cinematography is studying this movie. There's a lot of other kind of historical things that were happening. They had access to cheaper cameras and to cheaper film. And, they've, especially after the liberation from the Nazis, they've been inundated with American movies, so there's a kind of a fascination with Hollywood movies. Like Hitchcock was huge for these people, Howard Hawks and John Huston and stuff like that. So you had a culture who was very, very excited to make movies again. Of course, France had a very long, as old as anybody, film culture as well, silent films, relays, etc. But yeah, the movement really did flip the script on a lot of things. And I'm glad you brought that up, because when I wanted to ask you, I think this is one of the first French New Wave movies you saw. And I think I pitched this movie to you, Megan, as this is, I think, what a lot of people expect a French New Wave movie would be,
Yes.
And let's just describe it real quick. This is a movie that is following a young woman who is a kind of emerging pop star. She has like one or two singles out. She is not immensely famous. She's not Taylor Swift, but she is a professional singer who is awaiting the doctor's diagnosis. She's awaiting a lab results because she appears to be sick. And the very worst case scenario that seems likely is cancer. And this movie takes place, it's called Cleo From 5 to 7. She is supposed to get her test results at 7. And it's kind of her wandering around Paris, trying to kill time, trying to distract herself from that diagnosis. But it's not necessarily real time, because sometimes she's getting coffee with a friend and it's fun. And a 10-minute scene is actually like 30 minutes or something of time. Or sometimes she's getting her tarot card reading. It's kind of excruciating. And so 5 minutes of screen time, or 2 minutes of actual plot time. And you have a clock that kind of pops up on with
Hmm.
each chapter. So you have a kind of high concept. You have not stars we're familiar with in America, and some of you are professional actors, but you have a kind of existentialist dread going throughout it, but
Yes.
primarily shot on real locations in Paris, which is a big factor for it.
Well said,
So,
well said. I thought it felt very like scrapbooky, if that's
mm,
the right
yeah,
term
yeah,
of it, I guess, and anecdotal, I guess, because there
yeah.
are even some instances where, um, and kind of POV as well. I guess I was is a part of it because we're seeing, like, for instance, she watches a little short film, and we get to see the entire short film, like in the film. So
Right.
that's pretty unheard of, and like
Yeah.
a fun little divot into the life of this person, and
Hmm.
quite a big. I mean, it's also like it's an hour 30, like clean cut, like
Right.
not a lot of time. So in other words, like every frame kind of counts, and they do kind of dedicate quite a bit of time to this little short film that we get. So I
Right.
don't know. So it is experimental in that way, and I also was like, it's very the vibes are correct for me in terms of like a French New Wave,
Right.
in terms of it being experimental with time, but also like classic dread existentialism underlying things. There's like
Right.
humor in it, so
Mm.
there's kind of a lot going on, but it does feel it has that like artsy, quote unquote artsy
Right.
feel that a lot of our indie films of today kind of feel like, or just other smaller budget films kind of feel like nowadays. So you can really see, I felt like its origin in that, like that vibe of cinema.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're hitting on something that's really great. That, like, this is not a daunting movie to watch. This
Yeah.
is it is 90 minutes. It's short. It's surprisingly fun.
Hmm.
I mean, it hits hard with this woman who is, contemplating everything.
Hmm.
And it thinks she might be dying, but it is also like there's just some beautiful moments of kind of slice of life in Paris and beautiful moments of her reflecting on her day and
Hmm.
kind of seeing things in a new light. But it's not a 4 hour Russian movie as much as I like those.
Yes.
um, I think this is a really great gateway movie for someone who's never seen a foreign movie before. This might be one of the first ones I'd recommend
Sure.
they check out because it's very, deep and rewarding, but it's digestible and the concepts are not too opaque. It's pretty,
Yeah.
it's it's kind of obvious, with what's happened with time. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
And I think that like it almost feels timeless in like the sense of like a old 30s film or
Mm,
something like that. I thought of like 30s,
sure.
40s stuff, even though it's not, well, it is chronological, but it's not like you say, like a perfect timeline or anything like that. But it
Right.
that anecdotalness kind of
Mm,
feels reminds me of that. And just the way that they're bobbing and weaving throughout the storyline of what she's doing, basically what Cleo's doing. That's the
yeah.
whole, that's what's going on. That kind of felt something of the past,
Right.
but modern in a way.
Yeah, I think I fully agree. Now
Mhm.
I have to ask Megan, as a woman, and this is a woman's story, and
Yes.
a woman director. She also wrote it, Agnes Varda. What kind of stood out to you that or did you have moments like, oh man, I want to do that? Or did you feel particularly seen by this movie as a woman?
I it's funny because I thought of it too, and of course I love women directors. It's so interesting for me to see.
Mm.
I think the question for me, like to answer that, came back to Cleo in general. If we could talk about like
Sure,
Cleo,
of course.
because my first like initial impressions of Cleo was that she's not necessarily like a feminist icon, if you will, or in the
Sure.
first. And she's a bit like you say, she was a budding pop star, but she kind of has all these tropes of like of anti-feminism almost, if you will.
Hmm.
She's a little bit flippant, and she's kind of well, it starts out with her, basing her next couple hours off of this tarot read,
Yeah,
which is something kind of like effeminized itself, like just mysticism, I
sure.
guess, which I do like, and like I think that comes a part of it too. But she's superstitious, like,
Hmm.
so all these things going for her, and then on top of that, she's becoming increasingly upset. I mean, understandably, but over these this diagnoses or potential diagnoses that she's becoming quite a like um we can see how she interacts with the people around her, but
Right.
I think you get, which is kind of not in the greatest way, to be honest. And I think we get the sense that that's not necessarily because she's going to get this diagnosis. This is kind of like how she is. So,
Right.
um, seeing her go through all of that was fun, but I also just was interested by her like characterization, I guess,
Yeah,
in the
she certainly
beginning.
starts off pretty vain, I think
Yes,
we'd
vain is
say.
a good word to say.
And I've seen this movie a few times. I really feel for her because she has, as anybody who's expecting a diagnosis would kind of see it everywhere. Everywhere
Right.
she's going, people are kind of talking about death and depressing things, and
Mm-hmm.
even her assistant, who's an older woman who seems to have a kind of sure head on her shoulders comparatively, who's telling her to buck up, is then also talking about death often, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
there's the scene where she really seems, where her composer and lyricist come by, who's like, this is like the studio throwing these people together, not necessarily like her friends, but they're friendly, and just they go through this whole routine about, oh, we're the doctors here to give you medicine, really just kind of mocking her for being nervous about being sick, which is, pretty shitty. And then
Yeah.
the song they want her to sing is a beautiful song that is about,
Mhm.
I'm fucking worthless without you. It's this very, very dark, depressing song about shriveling up and dying because they think they're going to be left by their man. And we hear her first single a couple times throughout the movie, and it's this much more upbeat, fun
Mhm.
song that's more what she wants to do. And she does sing this depressing song in the middle, and it just kind of throws a fit like, I'm not singing this, what's wrong with you? And I think at first, it on my first viewing, it did feel very, oh, she's just having a temper tantrum, but
Kind
they
of,
know she's
yes.
proud, she might be dying, or at least she thinks she
I
is, and
know.
they have her sing this very, very bleak thing. I think it's an understandable reaction.
Right.
um
It's interesting because like her reaction to the potential diagnosis is completely understandable. Like that's
mhm,
fine. But it
sure.
also we see the people around her kind of or like you say, like demean her in that way.
Right.
So how like that was what we were reconciling is with like this why create this main character
Mm,
of a pop star diva type, like kind of like Marilyn Monroe-esque,
sure.
probably in the States if it were cast that way,
Right.
for people to like get a picture of it, I guess. Um, why create that? And then there's also but there is also like a definite, I guess, just sadness throughout
Sure.
Of Cleo because of her circumstance, of course, but then also like I think even more ingrained in her life as well. So maybe that's in talking about it, maybe that's like what's happening too is there's a deeper sense of the existentialism going on because of her unfulfilled career, possibly, or something
Right.
like along that regards.
Yeah, I mean, I think this movie does an interesting thing. Like, she's vain, and it was, especially in the first half of the movie, she's regularly looking into mirrors. And there's a point where
Mm-hmm.
there's a great moment where after she kind of throws this fit, she actually takes off what is revealed to be a wig and has a much
Right.
shorter haircut. She changes into a different dress, and she's literally not wearing the costume the studio had her wear at this point.
That's true.
And
Mm-hmm.
she goes out in the street, and she's looking at a mirror again, and then she turns around and she actually faces the world. And that's the last time she looks in a mirror in the movie, after
Oh, very
dozens of
nice.
times in the first like 40 minutes where she keeps looking at mirrors. So you kind of have
Fair.
her processing her vanity. And
Okay.
then you have the scene where she goes to see her friend, who is a nude model for sculptors.
Mm-hmm.
And there's talking about they're completely different relationships to her body. And like, well,
Right.
Cleo feels very empowered by her beauty. She's like, I could never do that. They would just be finding flaws.
Yes.
And her friend, whose name is escaping me, says, "Oh, I'm not proud of my body. My body makes me happy."
Yeah, yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's like my body makes me happy, not proud. So I think it's an interesting way of examining that Cleo is not judged by Varda or by this movie
Mm-hmm.
for being concerned of her looks. She is a young woman who's trying to be a pop singer.
Yeah.
It's an important factor. you know,
True, true.
yeah,
You're right. It feels very it felt very true in that regard.
right,
Or like like societal problems, I guess,
yeah.
that can very well happen. And then I do like the character of the friend I'm who escapes my the name escapes my memory
I'll look
too,
it up.
but
Yeah,
she was a great foil to her and a very clear foil of like what I would think, or I think what is maybe traditionally associated with feminist like
Hmm.
icons of being maybe more not sexually free, but just like free and like body autonomy, I guess,
Right.
free in a way, which was fun to see.
And I had to look up the friend is Dorothy. So for those who are
Dorothy.
playing along at home who've seen the movie, we're talking about Dorothy.
Sorry, Dorothy. It was
um,
great.
yeah, she's a great character, and I think
Hmm.
kind of going back to the French New Wave for this, it's very slice of life of just her kind of running into friends, her just having
Yes.
conversations with strangers. Like you also have like her talking to the young cab driver who's a woman who has a
No, that's true.
very different lifestyle, who's free in this way of like, yeah, sometimes I'm driving around late at night, it's a little scary, but I do it,
Yeah.
and that's something that Cleo can't comprehend. Going back a little bit to French New Wave history, it's interesting tidbit. The guy who plays Bob, who's the composer, is
Hmm.
Michel Legrand, who actually was the composer for this movie and the
Okay.
composer for many other French New Wave movies, particularly those of Jacques Demy, who Agnes Varda is married to. So there's also kind
Oh,
of all in the familyness to French New Wave. Like you see
cute.
the same people popping up, not just the same actors, but like I said, that there's this little short film within the film that's like an old school
Yeah.
Harold Lloyd, Charlie Chaplin thing, and it
Yeah.
stars Anna Karenina, a French New Wave actress, and Jean-Luc Godard, one of the other main
Yeah.
directors. So
True. Very much a club.
yeah, that's kind of a fun thing about watching these movies.
And he was the piano player, her
The
husband?
composer, the composer was the
Uh,
worked with her husband often and worked on that
oh, okay.
movie. Yeah,
Oh, I see, I see. Sorry, I
yeah,
thought you meant in
no, no,
the like, because they were fun too. I it was fun to see, like, or there was a lot of, like, levity in some characters,
yeah,
which was, I guess it goes back to that slice of life thing because it is very Cleo against the world kind of
hmm,
vibes, and then also how does this person interact with basically all of Paris and all of everybody in her life, and because we
yeah,
get great cafe scenes and you know, I think her literally standing kind of against the world and against Paris as a background is kind of fun to see, but that's she is a very like compelling main character in that regard. Like she does,
yeah,
I think she does take on that role of it's kind of me against or the mentality of me against everyone really,
right,
really well, and expresses it very well throughout her whole performance, basically, which she's in every, every scene of this thing. So
yeah. And it is, it's like the kind of combination of just death being mentioned on like
yeah,
being out and about, or cancer being mentioned
yeah,
specifically, or much worse, her friends being like, or her acquaintances being deliberately inconsiderate, so she's kind of
hmm,
always being reminded by it. Going back on the note of maybe a classic French New Wave thing of just a relationship not going the way you think, there is a boy meets girl thing towards the
right.
end of this movie where she runs into a soldier. What did you think of him as a character when it's up happening with them?
I kind of laughed a little. He was the simpiest soldier there ever was, but and I'm being
Sure.
very, annoying about it. It was very sweet. Like I don't know, it
Yeah.
was a sweet moment, definitely. Their interaction was sweet, but he was just he would do anything in the world for Cleo, like all of a sudden, and it
Yeah.
feels kind of like almost in a way like a fantasy moment for
Hmm.
her. Like it's very unexpected. He's just out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden they have an incredible connection and just kind of tag along with each other and get along great and swimmingly, and
Yeah.
she needs his he's a very like chatty person. She says she needs his chattiness at the moment to kind of
Right.
like distract her, I guess, from what's a coming. So I liked that he was sort of the embodiment of something physical, I guess, that she needed, which was just like distraction to me.
Right. Right.
It
Because
could
they
have
don't
been
really have a
poetic in
romantic
that regard.
relationship, I don't think,
No,
and
no,
it
they don't
doesn't.
kiss
Right.
or anything.
And he's a soldier who's like going back to the war, which is the war in
Yeah,
Algeria, like tomorrow, and it's
right.
also kind of like a soldier's fantasy. If I met this pop singer, this gorgeous woman, but again, it's and what'd you do? Like I took her to the hospital to get lab results,
Yeah.
and then we found out she has cancer. So,
Yeah,
um,
true.
yeah, so I thought that was an oddly sweet interaction that they have, and he's the first person she really kind of opens up to largely because I think it is a stranger who's
Yeah.
curious.
Mhm.
And it comes out that like, yeah, Cleo's not really her name. That's the
Hmm.
stage name, and all these other
True, true.
things just kind of come tumbling out. But it's not exactly a crying confession. It's more just like two adults talking, which is
Yeah.
I think the core of most French New Wave movies are is just two adults talking.
Yeah, true. It's nice. It wasn't that love saved her in the end or anything like that.
Right.
Nothing at that extreme, or that fantastical, I guess.
Yeah.
But I like that also that it was a male character that wasn't like, not all male characters as a foil to Cleo are just terrible, or like or boyish, I guess, in some way, because there were other
Right.
instances of very boyish, like young boys that she interacted with and just not going great. Or I think it just showed that she felt very like judged by
Right.
a lot of people of the opposite sex. And I think that she didn't like it was an instance where that's not her whole reality, and that's not just, of course, the reality, I think, of the world. Like, and
Right.
not all men are like that. So I think it was a nice, like, just reality
Yeah.
dampener, I
and
guess.
he's and it's not like he's like this perfect saint. He's still kind of occasionally bumbling and maybe
Hmm.
says the wrong thing, but he's a breath of fresh air for men in this movie, because like she does have a boyfriend as well, who's a
Yeah.
older guy who's kind of implied financing this, but also is in the movie for I think maybe less than 3 minutes, and it's just a quick
Hmm.
hi bye kind of play. Maybe she's the mistress and there's an actual wife or something.
Yeah.
Like a lot of like I'll try to take you out on Friday. Just like they do not go out often. It seems like she's kind of kept. They're not seen in public very often, is the idea that
Yes.
you get. So yeah, this guy is a breath of fresh air comparative to that and the composer. You know.
Hmm. That was kind of fun. I think that Varda was playing with that a little bit, because in the movie when that happened, I think that the music kind of swelled and it became
Right.
very romantic, and it was also like she was dressed in a very like romantic 1930s-esque
Yes, actually, that
um
seems very 1930s. The
like
being in the
gown,
nightgown and then your man comes
dressing
in.
gown.
Yes,
Yes,
that's
literally fawn
right.
over him. And then as soon as he leaves, she kind of starts complaining again about how terrible their relationship is.
Yeah.
So that, as funny as it was, I think that was also like a definitely a play, I guess, on
I
what
didn't
was
make that connection, but you're
happening.
right. That scene's in almost every 1930s like comedy, like that's kind of
Oh my
glamour,
god.
or not even comedy, like a lot of dramas. And then she meets a better man, in the Hollywood
Well, and
versions.
yes, very
Yeah,
Hollywood-esque, it felt like
right,
to me. So that's where it felt very American, almost like American
right.
Hollywood-esque.
And also
um,
like on that note too, where she's singing the song, it almost becomes like a surreal musical because like out of nowhere there's like a black
mhm,
backdrop that does not exist in this apartment. She's got this gorgeous loft apartment that is
right.
almost completely white, and then suddenly it is that kind of Hollywood moment of now it's a musical, you know.
Yes.
um, and there's an element here that's not literally here, and there's orchestra, like there's just a piano in the room, and now there's other instruments coming in,
Hmm.
and it's kind of a fun because it is such a different movie than those Hollywood ones, but it has allusions to it. It feels surreal in a way that I enjoyed, you know.
Yes. I think that that reminded me also of French New Wave, because that's the like experimental, I should
Yeah.
say, side of it, where I think it almost reminds me of like a variety show or anything
Yeah.
goes kind of thing. You kind of don't know what will turn into what. And that's what, like, if you think about the movie as a whole, for me, like, that's kind of how it felt, is like you don't know where you're going to go necessarily, or what things it's going to focus in on. But that eye of the camera and the eye of the director
Yeah.
really plays a part in throughout this whole thing, like throughout where everything goes. So that's like a difference, I would say, like of these types of films. How did you feel about like the ultimate diagnosis, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's because it is definitely cancer. It is the worst case scenario that she's worried about. So the movie ends with them actually seeing the doctor, them being Cleo and the
Hmm.
soldier, who was did not call and was kind of flippant about that. And it's like, I'll just come in tomorrow. It's going to be
Yeah.
radiation for 2 months and you'll be fine. Which it's always kind of scary when whenever chemo's involved, when there's cancer involved. Like sometimes you are going to be okay for quite a while, of course, but
Yeah.
it's still very scary. It's daunting. Also, being a pop star going through chemo, that's not exactly great for the career,
Right.
for everything we know about her and her importance of her own beauty. Um,
Yes.
that's going to be trying, but she has a confidence, and the movie ends with her saying, "I think I feel my fear leaving. I think I feel happy,"
Yeah.
and she just is in such a different place that it's I find the ending very touching and profound.
Yeah.
I really liked it. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like a nice bow on the existentialism like question, I guess. And I think
Right.
that's literally as simple as it could get, kind of, but it's
Hmm.
not poorly, like I don't think that her just being like, ah, like I'm okay now. It
Right.
was a mistake or anything, or they ran out of time or something like that. It felt very like it's kind of like funny in of itself too. It's like that's what everything was leading up to, and then that's literally all she needed, even after the doctor, like she barely caught him basically. And then
Yeah.
I really like the scene of him like flying away on his car and then
Yes.
just being left in the dust. I think there was a lot of humanistic humor, I
Hmm.
guess, or just like everyday humor.
Right.
Because how often do people like get, ignored by their professionals,
The
or
doctor.
especially
Yeah.
nowadays, a doctor, yeah, of
Yeah.
things that really matter.
Yeah.
um so that like a question about existentialism, I really like too, that it gets like played with, I guess. And it, like I said, it didn't feel like a willy-nilly, like, okay, it's fine now. I think it felt
Right.
very, in fact, it felt very deliberate. Like that's the true ending of her ordeal with this from
Right.
5 to 7. So
I agree. I thought it was thought it was well done.
mhm.
I was just telling Anne this. I remember former guest of this podcast, House Goodwill, was taught the film class that I saw this movie in, and
Yes.
I had seen it before. And I remember a guy stormed out of class the session we were talking about this movie, and
Oh
he just went on
goodness.
this very odd racist rant about these fucking foreign movies where they just are slow and the action just stops, because there's many moments in this movie where things do just stop and you have a flash to people Cleo's already seen. So like people she's already interacted
Hmm.
with. There's these great kind of montage of shots of them just kind of sitting in the frame in an interesting way, and also the people she's seen. And this guy just was so offended by that, and I responded to him
Wow.
and not angry, just generally surprised. Like, really, I thought that was like you didn't think that was kind of a nice meditative moment where we get to hang out with her thoughts, and he just left and never came back to the class.
Oh, like
So
ever
it
again?
ever, yeah, he just dropped the class, and it's
Now he's
very
got
odd.
a existentialism debate
Yeah,
in his own mind.
it was such a strange movie to have this is an inoffensive movie, and to have that extreme of reaction. Like, this is
Right.
by no means a boring movie. It's a
Mhm.
college class, for fuck's sake. We should be familiar with a slightly slower movie.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the foreign film class. But I know we had to had to make this a little bit shorter than usual, folks. We might jump to our recommendations. Um,
Semi, yes. Can you go? Do you want to go first, Seth?
I don't mind. Yeah. So I'm going to recommend another Agnes Varda movie because it's one of my favorite directors, and I really think people should check her out. Sorry, quick tangent too. We talked French New Wave, but I do have to say, well, most people will debate French New Wave began with either 1959 or 1960, with Truffaut's first movie or Godard's first movie. But Agnes
Mm,
Varda's first movie came out in 1955. She predates French New
oh,
Wave and was part of the movement. And when I've asked
nice.
professors about this, the why this hasn't been reevaluated on a grander scale, the answer is just kind of sexism. So even in academia, we can kind of address this, and I think we still need to, because a
Nice.
good 4 years before Truffaut. But I'm going to
Wow.
recommend one of her movies from the 80s, Vagabond, because she did have a very long, great career, and she made a movie
Mm,
about a similar about a woman who is being ignored and kind of not taken seriously, but is also a challenging character themselves, who is maybe much more vain than Cleo and does not quite have the
mm,
same emotional intellectual maturity, who is just kind of wandering around in France and making poor
mhm,
decisions. But it's a very empathetic movie. It's a very sweet movie, and quite a range of reactions that of characters have to her that
mhm.
felt very grounded. So she
Nice.
also, if you want to watch a short film of her, she did a great movie in the 70s about the Black Panther Party in Oakland. So
Oh, very
check that out
nice.
as well. It's really good.
Wow. I'm happy to be, like I said, have been introduced to this auteur, we should say,
Yeah, we can
for
say
sure.
auteur. It's a
Yeah,
French movie. Yeah.
definitely. That's cool. That's so cool. I didn't know like about that, and I love that. That's awesome. I actually come empty-handed to
Oh,
our recommendations in terms of a film, unfortunately. But
that's
I
all
think
right.
that the disjointed like narrative, I think it's always really fun. It reminded me a lot of like Mrs. Dalloway,
Mm,
classic English lit stuff
sure.
where we're going in. It's very vignette where we go in and out of characters, and there's for sure has been an adaptation. There was a more accurate to this like narrative and adaptation called like, oh gosh, I'm gonna forget it, but it's like 2 hours or I think it's called The Hours specifically,
Oh,
and
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
goes like more time or more hour by hour kind of depiction of it. So it is more chronological in that sense because Mrs. Dalloway is disjointed with multiple characters. But
Mm,
I think like I really want to get into and recommend to people trying these disjointed narratives in reading, in literature, in film, whatever, because I think that like that experimental like aspect helps with just being creative, I guess, with how we storytell. And this
right.
it's fun to see for me. So, and this one wasn't, while Cleo 5 to 7 wasn't disjointed, it was still like a play in that real time aspect. That's also fun to see too. So
Yeah.
I
And it
I
is
think
essentially
that's my,
vignettes. Yeah.
yeah, vignette style. I think that's going to be my like overall recommendation to myself,
Perfect.
to
I love
everybody.
it.
Yeah, but and that's also something that I was happy to see in the movie too. Yeah, love it.
Great. Well, I'm also just gonna give a last pitch for this movie. I really encourage everybody to see it, even if you have no
Mhm.
interest in 1960s France. It's also just kind of fun history because I like this. You just have casual notes about the France-Algerian War. Things that
Right,
aren't exactly a thing we talk about that often in the United States.
that's
You
true.
have like news reports about that. Um, it's just a really fascinating, deep character study, and it's a great way to learn more about the world and ourselves. So I highly recommend giving this another Varda movies a go.
I agree. It felt very like timely
Yeah.
for when it was made, and even in that, that helps create the sense of like slice of life. So for people like experimenting with that now, like that's really it's really cool to just open a scrapbook basically of that timeline from the
Right.
past, like of when this was made. So that's really that was fun for me too, and I'm glad that you and I Seth got to talk about the French New Wave aspect because it's really important in cinema. Like you kind of
Yeah.
forget,
Yeah.
and the influence of it is so strong. And nowadays, and to indie film, like I think it literally like paved the way
Right.
for indie film in a lot of ways. So
Oh,
it
absolutely.
kind of,
Because these were often low budget movies. Varda's first movie
oh my
cost
gosh,
$14,000. You
it's
know.
and it's incredible. Yeah, like we
Yeah.
owe a lot to film being artistic in that sense. So
Right.
I love being reminded about that. So yeah, it was awesome. It was
Absolutely.
really fun
I
to
have to ask,
watch.
what do you think of the fashion in this movie?
Oh, that was one of the first things that jumped out. That was
Okay,
great.
good, good.
Yeah, yeah.
She has
And
fantastic outfits.
definitely. And in true French fashion, like very attuned to, even when she's kind of like demystifying herself or whatever,
Right.
still extremely glamorous
Yes.
and like pays attention to the necklace choice and everything like that. So
Oh, that
that's
was my
funny.
favorite details on rewatching. Just like I'm storming
Good.
out, but I gotta choose the right necklace for this
Yeah.
outfit. Well, there's six people standing around the loft watching her
Of
storm
many.
out.
Of so
Yes.
many jewelry. Yeah, yeah. That was
Yes.
fun.
Great. All right, folks. Well, that'll do it for this time. We'll be back with something pretty different next time, I think.
Oh yes. I can't wait.